The gunshot echoing through the valley made Bethany O'Malley clutch her swollen belly as she stumbled down the dusty road toward Jerome Junction, Arizona territory in the spring of 1878. 3 days of hard travel on foot had left her dress torn, her boots worn, and her hopes dwindling as quickly as her husband's life had slipped away at the hands of cattle rustlers just a week prior. Now, 8 months with child and alone, she could see the small mining town's buildings shimmering in the distance, her last chance for survival in a merciless land. Jerome Junction had sprung up around the copper mines that dotted the red Arizona hills, a collection of wooden structures and tents that housed everyone from miners and merchants to gamblers and girls of negotiable virtue. The main street was lined with saloons, a general store, a small hotel, and the ever-present sound of the stamp mills crushing ore day and night. As Bethany dragged herself toward the promise of civilization, the midday sun beat down relentlessly on her auburn hair, now matted with dust and falling loose from her once neat bun. The first building she reached was the Copper Queen Saloon, its bat-wing doors swinging as miners and cowboys wandered in and out, seeking liquid relief from their labors. Bethany paused, leaning against the hitching post, her breath coming in short gasps as her baby kicked forcefully within her womb. She needed help, and she needed it now. "You all right there, miss?" A deep voice startled her, and Bethany turned to see a tall man in a dusty black hat regarding her with concern in his steel blue eyes. I need somewhere to rest," she managed, her voice cracking from thirst. "My husband's dead and I've nowhere to go." The man's weathered face softened as his eyes fell to her pregnant belly. "Name's Zach Callahan," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. "Most folks around here call me Zach. Let's get you someplace to sit down." Before Bethany could respond, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she felt her knees buckle. Strong arms caught her before she hit the dirt, and the last thing she remembered was being lifted as easily as a child. When Bethany awoke, she found herself on a clean bed in a small but tidy room. A gray-haired woman with kind eyes sat nearby, wringing out a cloth in a basin of water. "There you are, dear," the woman said with a smile. "I'm Martha Wilson, Doc's wife. You gave us quite a scare." "My baby?" Bethany whispered, her hands flying to her stomach. "Still right where it ought to be," Martha assured her. "But you're exhausted and half-starved by the look of it. Mr. Callahan brought you here after you fainted, said he found you outside the Copper Queen." The memory came flooding back, and Bethany nodded weakly. "He was kind to help me." "That's Zach for you," Martha said, placing the cool cloth on Bethany's forehead. "Keeps to himself mostly, runs a small ranch outside town, but he's got a good heart. Now, you rest while I fetch you some broth." Over the next few days, Bethany recovered her strength under Martha's attentive care. She learned that Dr. Wilson and his wife had no children of their own and were happy to have her stay in their spare room above the doctor's office. On her third day there, a knock at the door revealed Zachary Callahan, hat in hand, his tall frame filling the doorway. "Madam," he said with a respectful nod, "thought I'd check in on you. Brought some things you might need." He gestured to a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Callahan, I don't know how to thank you," Bethany said, genuinely touched by his kindness. "Zach," he corrected gently, "and no thanks needed. Just doing what any decent man would do." His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, met hers briefly before he looked away. "If you're feeling up to it, I was wondering if you might like to take a walk. Doc says you should start moving around a bit." Bethany agreed, and soon they were strolling slowly down the main street of Jerome Junction. Zach was a quiet man, but as they walked, he pointed out the various businesses and told her a little about the town. "Been here since '72, he explained. "Came out from Texas after the war. Wasn't much here then, but copper brought the railroad and the railroad brought people." "And what brought you?" Bethany asked, curious about this taciturn man who had saved her. A shadow crossed his face. "Looking for something I couldn't find back home, I suppose. Peace, maybe. He didn't elaborate, and Bethany didn't press. She understood the need for new beginnings all too well. As they passed the general store, a group of women gathered on the porch fell silent, eyeing Bethany with undisguised curiosity. One of them, a plump woman in a garish yellow dress, stepped forward. "Well, if it isn't our mysterious newcomer," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I'm Veronica Sutton, head of the Ladies' Aid Society. We were just wondering about your situation." "Mrs. O'Malley is recently widowed," Zach said firmly before Bethany could respond. "She's under the Wilsons' care for now." "How unfortunate," Veronica said, her eyes lingering on Bethany's wedding ring. "And your husband was—" "Patrick O'Malley," Bethany said, lifting her chin. "We were heading to California from Missouri when bandits attacked our wagon." The women exchanged glances, their suspicion evident. Bethany felt her cheeks flush with anger and shame. She knew what they were thinking. A young, pregnant woman with no husband and no family was an object of suspicion, regardless of her story. "Well," Veronica said after a moment, "we're always looking for new members in our society. Once your condition is resolved, of course." "I appreciate that," Bethany replied coolly, "but I'll be needing work soon. I was wondering if anyone might need help with sewing or cooking." "Mrs. Miller at the hotel might need a laundress," one of the younger women offered, earning a sharp look from Veronica. "I'm sure something suitable will turn up," Veronica said dismissively. "Good day, Mr. Callahan. Mrs. O'Malley?" As they walked away, Bethany fought back tears of frustration. "They don't believe me," she whispered. "Folks around here can be suspicious of newcomers," Zach said quietly, "but they'll come around. Truth has a way of standing its ground." Over the following weeks, Bethany settled into life in Jerome Junction. Mrs. Miller did indeed hire her to help with laundry and mending at the hotel, work she could do even as her pregnancy advanced. The pay was meager, but it allowed her to begin saving for her child's future. To her surprise, Zach Callahan continued to check on her regularly, sometimes bringing vegetables from his garden or a freshly caught trout from the creek near his ranch. Martha Wilson noticed the rancher's attention and smiled knowingly at Bethany one evening as they sat mending clothes. "That man's been alone too long," she commented. "Been nice seeing him in town more often." "He's just being kind," Bethany protested, though she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her whenever Zach appeared at the door. "Zach Callahan doesn't do anything out of mere kindness," Martha replied. "He's particular about who he spends time with, always has been." As Bethany's time drew near, she found herself both dreading and anticipating motherhood. The loss of Patrick still ached like an open wound, but the life growing inside her gave her purpose. One afternoon, as she sorted linens at the hotel, she overheard Veronica Sutton and her friends taking tea in the lobby. "It's scandalous how that Callahan man fawns over her," Veronica was saying. "A woman in her condition, with such a convenient story about a dead husband." "But she wears a wedding ring," another woman pointed out. "Anyone can wear a ring," Veronica scoffed. "I've half a mind to write to Missouri and inquire about this Patrick O'Malley. I doubt he ever existed." Bethany's hands trembled as she clutched the sheets to her chest. She wanted to burst into the room and confront them, to show them the locket around her neck that contained a tiny portrait of Patrick, to tell them how he had held her hand as the life drained from him, making her promise to keep going for their child's sake. Instead, she finished her work in silence and walked back to the Wilsons with her head held high. That evening, when Zach came to visit, Bethany was still upset. He noticed immediately, his brow furrowing with concern. "Something's troubling you," he said as they sat on the Wilsons' small porch. Bethany hesitated, then told him what she'd overheard. To her surprise, Zach chuckled, a low rumble that she'd rarely heard from him. "Veronica Sutton has been running this town's rumor mill since before the railroad came through," he said. "Don't pay her any mind. Your business is your business." "But it hurts," Bethany admitted. "Patrick was real. Our love was real. And now all I have left of him is this baby, and these people think I'm some sort of "You don't owe anyone your story," Zach said firmly. "Not me, not them. All that matters is what you know to be true." His words comforted her, and as they sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Bethany felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since Patrick's death. 3 nights later, Bethany went into labor. Dr. Wilson was away delivering a baby at a ranch outside town, so Martha sent for the midwife, a Navajo woman named Sarah who lived at the edge of town. Zach, who had been bringing over a new cradle he'd built, was dispatched to find the doctor. The labor was long and difficult. As dawn broke, Bethany's screams filled the small room above the doctor's office. Sarah's calm presence and Martha's encouragement were all that kept her going through the waves of pain that threatened to overwhelm her. "Your baby is coming now," Sarah said finally, her dark eyes meeting Bethany's. "One more push." With a cry that seemed to tear from her very soul, Bethany gave one final push, and moments later, the wailing of a newborn filled the room. Martha's face appeared in her field of vision, beaming with joy. "It's a boy," she announced, "a beautiful, healthy boy." Tears of exhaustion and happiness streamed down Bethany's face as Sarah placed the tiny red-faced infant on her chest. She looked down at her son, at the shock of dark hair so like his father's, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, Tadhg," she whispered, using the Irish name Patrick had chosen if their child was a boy. "Tadhg Patrick O'Malley." Sarah looked up sharply. "What did you call him?" "Tadhg," Bethany repeated. "It's Irish. It means poet or storyteller. It was my husband's father's name." Martha frowned slightly. "That's unusual. How do you even spell that?" Before Bethany could answer, the door burst open and Dr. Wilson rushed in, followed by Zach, who hung back respectfully in the doorway. The doctor quickly examined both mother and child, pronouncing them healthy but exhausted. As word spread through Jerome Junction about the birth, visitors began to arrive. Mrs. Miller came with a basket of baby clothes, and even some of the miners' wives stopped by with small gifts. Veronica Sutton and her friends also made an appearance, their curiosity overcoming their suspicion. "What a darling child," Veronica cooed insincerely, peering at the sleeping infant. "And what have you named him?" "Tadhg," Bethany said, bracing herself. "Tadhg Patrick O'Malley." The reaction was immediate. Veronica's eyebrows shot up nearly to her hairline. "Taj? What kind of name is that? How do you even pronounce it?" "It's pronounced like tiger without the ear," Bethany explained patiently. "It's Irish." "Well," Veronica said with a nervous laugh, "that's certainly different. Don't you think the poor child will be teased something terrible with a name like that? Perhaps something more normal would be kinder." The other women nodded in agreement, murmuring among themselves. Bethany felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. "It was my husband's father's name," she repeated, her voice tight. "Even so," one of the other women chimed in, "this is Arizona, not Ireland. He'll never fit in with a name no one can pronounce." "Might as well name him Geronimo," another woman tittered, and several laughed outright. Bethany clutched her baby closer, fighting back tears. She had endured so much the loss of Patrick, the arduous journey, the suspicion of these women, and now they were mocking the one thing she could give her son from his heritage. "That's enough." Zach's quiet voice cut through the laughter like a knife. The women turned, startled as he stepped fully into the room. He'd been so silent they'd almost forgotten his presence. "Mr. Callahan, we were just suggesting," Veronica began. "I heard what you were suggesting," Zach interrupted, his voice low, but carrying an undercurrent of steel that silenced the room. He moved to stand beside Bethany's bed, looking down at the sleeping infant before meeting her eyes. "Tadhg," he said, pronouncing it perfectly. "It'll be a strong name where I'm from." The room fell silent as Zach turned to face the women, his stance protective. "My grandmother was Irish. Came over during the potato famine, taught me that names have power, that they connect us to those who came before." He looked back at Bethany. It's a fine name for a boy born in these mountains. Strong, unusual, like the land itself. Veronica opened and closed her mouth, clearly taken aback by Zach's defense. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose we should be going. Good day, Mrs. O'Malley. Mr. Callahan." The women filed out, their whispers following them down the stairs. Martha, who had observed the exchange with barely concealed amusement, followed them to see them out, leaving Bethany alone with Zach and her newborn son. "Thank you," Bethany said softly once they were gone. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Zach replied, his gaze still on the baby. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the child. Surprised, Bethany nodded, and Zach gently lifted Tadek from her arms. The baby stirred but didn't wake, settling against the rancher's broad chest as if he belonged there. Something in Zach's expression as he looked down at the infant made Bethany's heart flutter strangely. "My father was Zachary, too," he said after a moment, "and his father before him. There's comfort in carrying a name that has history." He carefully returned Tadek to Bethany's arms. "Don't let anyone take that from him." In the days that followed, Bethany's recovery was swift. Bolstered by Martha's care and the steady stream of visitors who came to see the baby. To her surprise, many of the miners and cowboys who frequented the hotel where she worked were quite taken with little Tadek, their rough hands gentle as they awkwardly held the infant, their voices softening as they spoke to him. One evening, about 2 weeks after Tadek's birth, Zach arrived at the doctor's house with a small wooden box tucked under his arm. "Something for the boy," he said gruffly, placing it on the table beside Bethany's chair where she sat nursing Tadek. Inside was a tiny silver ring, obviously very old, attached to a leather cord. "It was my grandmother's," Zach explained, "a claddagh ring, Irish symbol of love, loyalty, and friendship. Too small for a man's hand, but he could wear it around his neck when he's older. If you approve." Bethany was speechless, touched beyond words by the thoughtful gift. "Zach, I couldn't possibly. I have no family to pass it to," he interrupted. "It should go to someone who will appreciate what it means." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. In that moment, Bethany realized that her feelings for this quiet, honorable man had grown into something more than gratitude. As spring turned to summer, Bethany established a routine. She returned to work at the hotel, bringing Tadek with her in a basket that Mrs. Miller allowed her to keep in the kitchen. The baby thrived, growing plump and strong, his dark blue eyes eventually settling into the same deep brown as his father's had been. To Bethany's relief, the initial mockery of his name had subsided, replaced by a grudging acceptance among the townspeople. Zach continued to be a constant presence in their lives, stopping by almost daily with small gifts or offers of help. He built a crib for Tadek that was a work of art, carved with intricate Celtic knots that he said he remembered from his grandmother's stories. One hot July evening, as Bethany sat on the Wilsons' porch with Tadek asleep in her arms, Zach arrived on horseback, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I was wondering if you might like to come out to my place tomorrow," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "For dinner. Martha says she'd watch the boy." Bethany was surprised but pleased by the invitation. "I'd like that very much," she replied with a smile. The next day, Zach picked her up in a wagon, and they rode the 5 miles to his ranch in comfortable conversation. The rocking sea, as he called it, was a modest spread nestled against the foothills, with a small herd of cattle grazing on the surrounding grassland. The house itself was simple but solid, built of logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. "It's not much," Zach said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's paid for." "It's lovely," Bethany said sincerely, admiring the flower garden that bordered the path to the door. "I wouldn't have taken you for a gardener." Zach's ears reddened slightly. "Been fixing the place up a bit lately. Never saw much point before." Inside, the house was surprisingly cozy. A quilt hung on one wall and bookshelves lined another, filled with volumes that spoke of a man with broader interests than most would guess. Zach had prepared a simple but delicious meal of venison stew and biscuits, which they ate at a small table by the window overlooking the mountains. As they talked, Bethany learned more about Zach than she had in all the months since they'd met. He had fought for the Confederacy, not out of any great belief in the cause, but because Texas was his home. After the war, unable to face the devastation and unwilling to live under Reconstruction, he had drifted west, working as a cowhand until he saved enough to buy his small ranch. "I was married once," he admitted as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset. "Her name was Caroline. She died of typhoid fever our second year together. No children." He paused, staring out at the darkening landscape. "Never thought I'd want to try again. Until recently." Bethany's heart quickened at his words, at the way his eyes turned to her, open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I know it might be too soon," he continued. "I know you're still grieving Patrick, but I wanted you to know that if you're ready, I'd be honored if you'd consider me." Tears welled in Bethany's eyes. "Zach," she whispered, "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything now," he assured her. "I'm a patient man. I just wanted my intentions to be clear." On the ride back to town, they spoke little, but Bethany's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had loved Patrick deeply, and part of her felt disloyal for even considering another man. Yet, she couldn't deny her growing feelings for Zach, the sense of safety and respect she felt in his presence, the way her heart lifted when he walked into a room. Summer gave way to fall, and as the leaves on the cottonwoods along the creek turned golden, Bethany found herself spending more and more time at the rocking sea. She would bring Todd with her on Sundays after church, and they would share a meal with Zach before walking the property, the baby securely in Bethany's arms or, increasingly, in Zach's. The tenderness with which Zach treated Todd touched Bethany deeply. He spoke to the boy as if he understood every word, telling him stories about the ranch, about the mountains, about the stars that filled the Arizona sky. And Todd, for his part, seemed equally enchanted with Zach, his tiny face lighting up whenever the rancher appeared. In town, Bethany noticed a shift in how she was treated. The initial suspicion had been replaced by a grudging respect, particularly after it became clear that Zachary Callahan, one of Jerome Junction's most respected citizens, held her in high regard. Even Veronica Sutton had begun to nod politely when they passed on the street. As Christmas approached, Jerome Junction was transformed by festive decorations, with pine boughs and red ribbons adorning the storefronts and a massive tree erected in front of the town hall. The Ladies' Aid Society, to Bethany's surprise, invited her to help organize the annual Christmas pageant, a peace offering of sorts that she gratefully accepted. One snowy evening in mid-December, as Bethany rocked Todd to sleep in the small apartment she had recently rented above the milliner's shop, a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Zach standing there, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "I was in town for supplies," he explained, "and I wanted to ask you something." "Come in before you freeze," Bethany said, ushering him inside. Once he had removed his coat and warmed his hands by the stove, Zach turned to her, his expression serious. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what I said back in July, about my intentions." Bethany nodded, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. "I meant every word," Zach continued, "and my feelings have only grown stronger since then. I know you're still healing and I'd never want to rush you, but I also want you to know that I love you, Bethany O'Malley. You and Todd both." Tears filled Bethany's eyes as she looked at this man who had come into her life when she was at her lowest, who had defended her son's name, who had shown her that there could be love after loss. "Oh, Zach," she whispered, stepping closer to him, "I've been so afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I love you too." The smile that broke across Zach's face was like sunrise on the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, almost reverent, and Bethany felt something inside her that had been broken begin to mend. When they parted, Zach reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I was going to wait until Christmas," he said, "but I don't think I can." Inside the box was a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the lamplight. "It was my mother's," Zach explained. "Bethany O'Malley, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of letting me be a father to Tadug?" Bethany looked from the ring to Zach's hopeful face, then to Tadug, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. She thought of Patrick, of the love they had shared, of his final words to her. "Live, Beth. Promise me you'll live." "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, Zach, I will marry you." Their wedding took place on New Year's Day, 1879, in the small church at the edge of town. To Bethany's astonishment, nearly everyone in Jerome Junction attended, including Veronica Sutton and her circle, who presented the couple with a handmade quilt as a wedding gift. Dr. Wilson gave the bride away, while Martha held 6-month-old Tadg, who watched the proceedings with wide, curious eyes. As they exchanged vows, Bethany felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, and Zach kissed her with a tenderness that belied his strength, the church erupted in cheers. The celebration continued at the Copper Queen Saloon, transformed for the day into a wedding reception hall. As Bethany danced in her husband's arms, Tadg safely asleep in a makeshift cradle nearby, she couldn't help but marvel at the twists and turns her life had taken. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Callahan?" Zach asked, smiling down at her. "About how I never expected to find love again," she replied honestly. "About how grateful I am that I fainted at your feet that day." Zach laughed, a sound that had become less rare in recent months. "Best thing that ever happened to me," he said. "You and that boy of yours." Later, as they prepared to leave for the ranch, their home now, Veronica Sutton approached them, a slightly sheepish expression on her face. "Mrs. Callahan," she said, using Bethany's new name with deliberate emphasis, "I wanted to apologize for my behavior when you first arrived, and especially for what I said about your son's name." Bethany was surprised but touched by the apology. "Thank you, Mrs. Sutton. That means a great deal to me." "It's a fine name," Veronica continued, glancing at Tadg, who was bundled up against the winter cold in Zach's arms. "Distinctive, and I hear he's already living up to it. Martha says he babbles more than any baby she's ever seen." "He's going to be a storyteller, just like his name suggests," Zach said proudly. "Got a lot to say. This one." As they rowed out to the rocking sea that evening, the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, Bethany leaned against Zach's solid warmth, Tadg sleeping between them. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the struggle, the uncertainty, and the unexpected joy she had found at the end of it. "I never thought I'd be happy again," she admitted softly. "After Patrick died, I was just trying to survive. For Tadg's sake." Zach's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Life has a way of surprising us," he said. "When I found you outside the saloon that day, I was just trying to help a woman in trouble. I never imagined you'd end up changing my life." "Our lives have both changed," Bethany agreed, looking down at Tadg. "And his will be different than I imagined, too. He'll grow up with your name as well as Patrick's." "Tadg Patrick O'Malley Callahan," Zach said thoughtfully. "That's quite a handle for a little fella, but like I said, it's a strong name. And he'll be a strong man, with both his father's blood in him." As the wagon crested the final hill, the lights of the ranch house came into view, golden and welcoming in the winter darkness. Home, Bethany thought. After all the uncertainty, all the loss, she had found her way home. Spring came early to the high desert that year, bringing wildflowers and new calves to the rocking sea. Tadg, now 10 months old, was taking his first tentative steps, tottering across the cabin floor with determined concentration. Bethany watched him from the kitchen window as she prepared dinner, her heart full of contentment. Outside, Zach was returning from checking the herds, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. As he approached the house, Todd spotted him through the open door and let out an excited squeal, abandoning his careful steps to crawl rapidly toward his adoptive father. "There's my boy," Zach said, scooping the child up as he entered. "Were you good for your mama today?" "He was perfect," Bethany said, smiling as she moved to greet her husband with a kiss. "And how was your day?" "Better now," Zach replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. "Always better when I come home to you too." As they sat down to dinner, Bethany reflected on the journey that had brought them here from that desperate day when she had stumbled into Jerome Junction to this moment of simple, profound happiness. She thought of the women who had mocked her son's name, and how Zach's quiet defense had been the beginning of a love she had never expected to find again. "I was thinking," Zach said as they cleared the dishes later, "that Todd might like a brother or sister someday, if you were agreeable." Bethany smiled, placing a hand on her stomach where, just this morning, she had felt the first fluttering movements of new life. "I think that could be arranged," she said. "In fact, I believe it already has been." The joy that spread across Zach's face was all the confirmation she needed that she had found not just a safe harbor, but a true home for herself and her children, the one who carried a name from a distant shore, and the one who would be born in this wild, beautiful land they now called home.